All right, we're at the bottom of the hour, so I would like to welcome you to today's installment of the 30-minute workout series, where we'll be exploring the action recorder in Civil 3D. My name is Jerry Bartels, and I'll be today's speaker. Assisting me on today's presentation, we got a little bit of a skeleton crew. It's just Jeff and I that are here today. Alan and Angel are taking some much-needed time off. While I'm running through the material, he will be in the background helping address any questions that come up along the way. If you've joined us before for a previous 30-minute workout, welcome back. If you're new to the concept, I'm sure you would agree that traditional training courses have a tendency to focus almost exclusively on the software features that you absolutely need to know to do your immediate job. Anything beyond that has to be learned through some other means, or worse yet, has to be discovered over a lifetime of use. That's the purpose of these sessions, is to help shorten that learning curve. We've got several ground rules for our sessions. The examples that we show will be somewhat abstract by nature. We do this intentionally. By using a more abstract example, we can focus solely on how a tool functions. Once you understand how that tool functions, you can apply it to any way that works best for your particular situation. We appreciate how valuable your time is, so we're committed to always starting and ending on time. We do cover a lot of material here. Please don't worry about spending most of the time trying to take notes. The sessions are recorded, and everyone that registers will get access to a recording. If you do have questions along the way, please put them in the Q&A pane, and we'll try and get an answer to them as we go. If any questions remain at the end of the session, we will absolutely try and get back to you with an answer. Finally, if you'd like to have a one-on-one follow-up call with us regarding any of the topics we've discussed during these sessions, please let us know. We always enjoy talking with other users. So a quick brief agenda look at what we're going to be talking about today. It's the action recorder, what it is, what it does, how it works, what we can do with it. This is kind of an extension of a prior session that I did around automation, where we started talking about things like creating macros and scripts and doing some simple Lisp and things like that. Basically, it's a situation where if you're doing something more than once, looking for a way to try and automate that so you don't have to keep going through the same process over and over. So the action recorder is kind of the next step in that journey. The next step after that, we'll do a session on Dynamo at some point in the future. So things we can do with action recorder, we can automate some things around drawing maintenance, creating, editing geometry, modifying settings. There are some limitations when we use it. We'll touch base on that as we go through. And then we'll look at the end ways we can share what we create with others. As always, this is a PowerPoint free zone. So that means this is my last PowerPoint slide. We'll minimize this and I'll hop out. I'm in Civil 3D 2023 at this point. The fact that I'm in 2023 is not something that is a requirement. The action recorder is actually a feature or a function of AutoCAD, which means it's available in the AutoCAD-based tools, Civil 3D, Map 3D, AutoCAD, Plant 3D, a number of other applications that are out there, and for many releases prior to 2023. So for the most part, I feel comfortable in saying whatever you might be using in your particular office, what we're showing today will be applicable to that. So where I can see the information about the action recorder in the Civil ribbon is under the Manage tab. There is an area here regarding the action recorder. And the way that we will actually learn about it by doing, but the thing that I would take and draw your attention to is there's some buttons here that are kind of like VCR buttons. I can record and play. This is how I'll build my macros. When we did macros in the past, we would have to kind of know the syntax of the command, what it was going to be asking for, the different types of ways we could respond, and we would have to kind of write that as we go. In this particular case, when we use the recorder, we can pretty much just do the task as we would in the interface, and it will build the macro for us. So it's a much easier way to build these commands. All right, so for example, let's look at the first type of command I would create here. Let me clean up my screen here just a touch. Command I'm thinking of is Audit. And if you've used Audit in the past, when we run the command Audit, it's always going to ask us, do we want to fix any errors detected? And the default is no. In 30 years, I don't think I've ever used the default no. I've always said yes. So we'll use this as a way to maybe automate. If I'm going to do some auditing, I'd like it to just do it and fix whatever it finds. So to create my new macro, I'm going to come up here to the record button, click on record. And once I do, you'll see a red dot appear on my crosshairs. That's telling me that the system is now recording what I'm doing. From here, I can pick buttons in the ribbon. I can pick toolbar buttons. I can click on palettes. I can type commands in. However I would typically launch commands, I can do that, and it will capture what I need to run the tool. So let's come down here to the bottom. I'm going to say audit. Fix any errors detected. I'll hit Y for yes, hit enter. I will have to wait for it to run through the audit process, which there was some things here that needed to be fixed. But once that's done, then I'm going to come up here to the top and I'm going to click on stop to tell it I'm done recording. And then I'm going to give it a name. Now, when I give it a name, the first limitation is you want to make sure that you don't give it a name of a command that already exists in the system, because it'll conflict with that. That could be a problem. So as much as I'd like to make this the new audit command right now, and there's probably ways I could do that with a combination of other tools, this will be a special audit command. So we'll call this special audit. The file is going to be saved in a extension ACTM, which is the action recorder macro. It's going to be stored in this folder, which is actually this empty folder here right now because we haven't built it yet. We'll talk about that in a bit for sharing. Description, this is where if I'm going to use this tool, not only here, but by other folks, I may want to provide some description of why I created it, what it's for, the things it's looking for. We could do that. And then there's some other things here that I can check for, you know, if I'm playing this back later, am I in a different flavor of AutoCAD than I was when it started, or when it was created, it may impact how it plays back. I'm just going to leave these as defaults. I'm not going to worry about changing those for now, and we'll click on OK. All right, new command has been created. Let's look at that folder. We see that that's where it's going to live now. So not only in this session of my Civil 3D, but in the next session that I launch, it will automatically have access to these commands. So if I wanted to run this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the top. This is my command drop down. I've only got one in here. I'm going to select that from the list, and I can hit play. And when I hit play, it'll go ahead and play back that command. Now, some of it may look like it's playing in the background. We may not see all of the command prompts, but when it's done, we'll get a dialogue. I actually kind of like the dialogue, but if you don't like the dialogue, to indicate that it's done, you could check the box that says don't show this to me again. If I click on close, come down here and look, we see the first time that I ran it, it repaired a number of things. The second time I ran it, it ran the special audit command. It just audit yes and had nothing to fix because those things were already addressed the previous time. All right, so I can do that. Other commands that I may want to do, if you do some research online regarding the action recorder, a lot of folks will automate the purge command. So if I were to, we'll just type the command in to get quick access to purge right now, we see we have a dialog box. Much like macros and scripts and Lisp routines, we have limited access to work with dialog boxes. Typically, I would tell you have no access, but there is some access available to the action recorder. I can maybe show you an example in the layer dialog box of that, but I wouldn't count on it. It's something you could test if you build these. Certainly if you're adding information or changing values, you know, what you do with the dialog, like I said, I wouldn't count on that. You want to take and run it as a command line, and then you're sure that it'll do what you're expecting. So I'm going to close out of this. If I wanted to run the purge command as part of the action recorder, what I would do is run the command by placing a minus sign in front of it, and then that would give me the command in a command line format that I could access not only all the things that the dialogue do, but also other things that like reg apps and that aren't even listed in the dialogue. So I'm going to cancel out of that. Let's make a new command here for purge. I'll do record. My command I'll say is purge. We'll say purge all. And then it comes up and says purge or enter names of things to purge. I'm going to do everything asterisk, which is the default. I'll hit enter. And because I'm using the action recorder, it kind of gives me a nice dialogue. The intention is these could be used in other places. So if it's going to be used in other places, do you really want it to use this value? In other words, do you want to use the value that's current at playback, which depending on the command may or may not be what you want? We want this to be used, all the time, or do I want to use the current default value? All right, so that's the type of decision that you'll have to make. If you accept a default on the command line, it's going to come up and tell you, based on the commands that are being used, do you really want that value, or do you want what comes up when the command is run? In this particular case, we're going to use the current default value, verify each name to be purged. I'll just spell it out to say no. All right, I'm then going to hit the up arrow again. We'll go back into purge, and this time I'm going to do reg apps, because even though I said all, that did not include the information contained in reg apps. Enter names to purge. I'll put in an asterisk this time. Verify names to be purged. I'll say no. Purged out some registered applications, and then I'm going to say stop. I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call this Super Purge. We'll say okay. And if we look at the name and we come down and click on the down arrow for the action recorder, oops, that's special audit. Let's do Super Purge. I can click on the down arrow here, and in the action tree, I can see the commands that have been run, so I can review that. I also have the ability to make some changes to what's here. One thing that I cannot do is I can't add new commands to this. I can maybe change some of the responses or pause for user input, and that we'll look at some examples of that, but I couldn't come in and like start adding more necessarily before a command or after a command. We'd have to go through and re-record to perform some edits like that. So with Super Purge, if I was going to run that, we just go ahead and now with that highlighted, click on play. It's automatically completed. And if we look, we see that it has gone through and purged out it purged it before, but it purged out any blocks, layers, line types, text styles, and then any registered applications that were part of the file. It's pulled those out. Those registered applications could be some vertical applications that we're running. Maybe it's from plant, maybe it's from AutoCAD architecture, could be any number of things. We don't have to worry necessarily about purging them out, because if we're currently using the vertical application and we go and try and run a command that would require that, it would automatically be reloaded. So it allows us to pull those out and free up some resources and then go from there. All right. Now we've created two commands. Now, one question that I had immediately when I started doing this is, hey, can I nest these things together? If I've already built a command, can I use those commands within an action recorder? And the answer to that is yes, kind of. All right, let me show you how that would work. Let's say I want to create a command that is going to, clean or handle some of the way my file is set up. I'd like to go through and audit. I'd like to go through and purge. I'd like to go through and bind any X references that I have or blocks. I'd like to convert everything to by layer. I'd like to promote any data shortcuts, things like that. I have some process that I go through, some cleaning thing. If I've already created some commands for those maybe individual items, could I add that to a full-blown, single command? And I can. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll click on record, and we'll go ahead and do this. I'm going to come up to the top here. We'll start by doing the special audit. I'll select that from the list and I'll hit play. So it's going to run the special audit command, and then I'll get the dialog box to tell me that that's done. Now, I don't necessarily have to pull the information out of the menu. The next thing I want to do is my Super Purge. If I start to type that into the command line, you'll see that that is now an official command that's found by autocomplete as I type that in. What that means is I've got options that I can now pull that command maybe from a toolbar button or from a palette. I now have the ability. It doesn't necessarily have to be pulled from the action recorder area. So we'll go ahead and say close, and then I'll leave it at that. I won't add anything else to this. Let's go ahead. We'll say stop. We'll call this clean. We'll say okay. And if I look at my action recorder, what you see is it has taken my previous commands and it's just made a copy of the contents and put it into here. All right. So they're not like subroutines that if I were to go modify the purge command, it's not going to come then and modify the clean command. It's just copying the contents and moving it over. So like if I were to come to Super Purge here, and let's say that I wanted to go through and verify all the names, yes, 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 all the way down the line, I can double click on this and change my response from no to yes, hit enter and save that. Now that that has been saved, you'll see that if I come back here and look at clean, my copy of Super Purge is still no. So I can nest these things together, but it's a one-time shot. Once you do it, it's not going to update if any of those other commands are updated moving forward into the future. All right, so clean will go ahead and do that for me. Other things, when I work on files, maybe I open this up and somebody else has been working on it. I like to know what's exactly in the file. So I need to know what layers are on, or, what layers are in here. If there's anything that's off or frozen, I want to do a zoom extents to see if there's any stuff floating out in no man's land. I want to maybe do unisolate. So rather than go through that process, I would like to automate that so I don't have to do that all of the time. I'm going to make a command that's going to show me everything if I'd like to see it. So we'll create a new command here. We'll go to record. And we'll say, in this case, because I'm going to start stringing together more and more commands, a good practice that I like to do is I like to start my macros with undo and then M for marker. I like to lay a marker down because if I'm going to be automating a bunch of stuff and if things don't necessarily work out the way that I expected, what I could do is I could always undo back immediately to that point before that command was run. So that's just a best practice that I like to do when I build these things. So we'll say undo mark. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to go into the command layer. I'm going to use the dialog or the non-dialog minus layer to get that. I'm going to say on, and layer names I should turn on. I'm going to say asterisk, and I'm going to say thaw. Layers I'd like to thaw so I can see those. I'll say asterisk. I'll hit enter again to get out of that command. That turned all of that on. I'm then going to use zoom extents to back me up and see if there's any information floating out in space. And then the last command, and I'm typing these in, but I could be grabbing them off the interface. I could be doing unisolate to unisolate any objects or make them visible. In this case, there doesn't happen to be any in this file. We'll, and I will do one more. As I mentioned, dialog boxes, you can't drive things in the dialog boxes. However, there are some instances like in the layer dialog box and maybe in design review, or not design review, in the design center, properties. There are some things you can do in those dialog boxes. For example, I'm going to create a layer. I'm going to use the dialog box as part of my macro because it's still running. I'm going to build a new layer here and I'm going to call it Jerry. And we'll set it to current. All right, and we'll close out of that. And then I'm going to stop. We'll say show all is going to be my command. We'll say okay. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to look and you'll see that undo mark, okay, layer on everything, thaw everything, get out of the command. Zoom extents, on isolate objects, and then notice when I use the layer command, even though I went in, it went through and it created a new layer, gave it the name Jerry, and then set that current. So it actually was in that instance driving some of the stuff in the dialog box. Now, what I want to tell you is that's unique, but I don't want to hide that from you because as you create these things, test it. See what control you do have. I would have told you up until about an hour before I started, no dialog box at all, but there are some instances where some of the dialog box will function. Let's undo back here. We'll say, well, as a matter of fact, let's just close out of this file and test these things. So we'll close out of the file, save changes. We'll say no. We'll open this guy back up again. We come back into here. Let's test our commands. First thing I want to do is I'm going to clean. So we'll say clean, play. All right, remember when I'm doing the clean, it's automatically doing the purge and the audit. So just like before, it's taken out those things. It's found some errors that were repaired as part of the audit process. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to do show all. So I'll go ahead and hit that. We'll say play. The macro is complete. We'll close out of that. I didn't close the dialog when I was done, but if I look at home, you see that it did create in a brand new drawing a layer Jerry and set that current. All right, so there are some instances where it will let you navigate the dialog. Now I've got some stuff floating out in space here that I'm going to erase and get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this. I could do, if you want to create a erase all macro, erase all and then remove the area in the middle here. Lots of ways these commands can be used. Let's look at this. Now that this is turned on, I've got a surface here. I need to give this drawing to somebody. They don't need it in a surface because they're just running it in Core AutoCAD or LT or something else, but they need to see this as 3D polylines or just polylines, not as a surface. The way that I would do that is I would explode it twice. First time you explode it, it makes it a block. Next time you explode it, it makes it polylines. So I'm going to make a tool that's going to quickly convert my surface. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to manage. Let's say record. And we'll say, like I said, just for the sake of safety here, we'll do undo mark to drop a marker. I'm then going to come up to modify. We'll say explode, select objects. I'll pick my surface, right click. It's exploded it once. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the up arrow to explode it again. Select objects. This time, I don't want them to have to pick it a second time. I'm going to respond by using the @ symbol, because when you pick something on the screen, it's literally registering a coordinate. It's not registering an entity. It's where your crosshair picked on the screen. So I want to pick in the same place again. So I'll hit enter, which is going to select that, and then enter again. It's exploded. And if I look at this, these are all individual objects. And we'll go ahead and come back to manage, and we'll stop the recorder. We'll call this surface to poly. We'll say okay. Let's undo, and we'll go back. We'll take us to back where it's a surface. And then if we were going to test this particular command, now, first thing, if we're going to test the command, explode when it says select objects, remember, it's not remembering an object, it's remembering a pick off the screen. If I want this to be portable, where I can use this in other files, remembering the coordinate of where this surface is isn't going to help me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to say pause for user input. That will allow them to pick the point and then use that moving forward. Otherwise, it'll just be hard coded for the same location here. So I'm going to say pause for user input, and then we'll say play. So we'll say play. It says select objects. This guy, right click, playback is done, and we see that now these are individual polylines. Okay, so you have to remember, as you're building these things, think about portability. Something else I'd like to do. I'd like to align this roadway so that it is basically this major part of the road is horizontal to my exhibit that I'm working with here, and I'd like it to be at 30 scale. The way that I typically do that is with a UCS command. When I work with the UCS command, that for some folks can be a dangerous tool. So maybe I'd like to do it for them as part of a macro so that they don't have to do it themselves. And I can allow them to use something maybe a little more powerful and not have to worry about there being a problem. So to do this, I'm going to say record. All right. And then I'm going to say undo, and then I'm going to drop a marker. All right. The command I'm going to use is UCS for user coordinate system. I'm going to use the option 3-point to define a new user coordinate system. I'm going to specify my first point is where the X and Y axis intersect. I'm going to pull down into the right to define the X axis parallel with my roadway. And then it's going to say specify a point in the positive Y direction, which it's going to default to creating something 90 degrees to this. So I'm going to hit enter to accept it. And then we're going to get the dialog. Well, in this case, I don't want to use the current value because depending on the points that they pick, I want to use the one that's automatically generated, not the one that I'm using right now. So I'm going to say use the one that's current at playback. I'm then going to use the command plan. I'll hit enter, and we'll say the current UCS. That'll square it up with the screen. I'm then going to say UCS, and I'm going to set it back to world so that I have coordinates in that match the world coordinate system, not the user-defined system with a 0, 0 here. So I'll set that to world. Now my crosshairs will be on an angle, but my system will still function the exact same way that it was working before. Last thing I want to do is set my scale. I'm going to hit Z for zoom. I'm going to hit S for scale, and we'll say 1 divided by 30 XP for 1 to 30 scale. We'll hit enter. It zooms up to that. We'll stop. I'll call this rotate view. We'll say OK. I'm going to say undo back so we can back up to this. Let's look at the command. Undo mark UCS 3 point. Well, I don't want to use the hard-coded ones that we had. So I'm going to say pause for user input for the first point. I'm going to say pause for user input for the second point. Because they may not be knowing what they're picking, I can come into here and we can say insert user message that says pick 2 points to define view orientation. We'll say okay. So I can add messages to this as well. Come down, plan, zoom scale. I could pause, let them put the scale in. Other than that, all of that looks good. Or rotate view, we'll go ahead and hit play. Pick 2 points to define the orientation. There's 1 point, there's 2 points, and just like that, it's automatically set it, and my scale is to 30 scale, and it's lined up with my view. All right. Last thing I want to look at is this. If I've got a border, and once again, this is an abstract example, I've got some geometry here with some revisions. I want to add another line for another revision in here. I know there's a lot of ways we can do this with blocks, X references, whatever. But let's say that in this example, I needed to make a similar change across multiple borders. What I could do, if I don't want to have to repeat something multiple times, I can create a command to assist with that. We'll go ahead and say record. And what I'm going to do to fix this is we'll say modify. I'm going to start by moving this geometry from the end of here to the end of here. And then I'm going to copy this geometry from the end of here to the end of here. And then I'm going to say exit. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend these 2 lines back down to the bottom like they were. We'll hit enter, and I could start going through and modifying text, but we'll just stop with that for right now. We'll hit stop. We'll call this fix rev. We'll say okay. With that created, let's hop to my next sheet. We'll look to the next sheet, and if we look at this, if I'd like to run it a second time, we'll go ahead, fix rev, we'll say play. When I click play, it automatically makes the adjustments, and that's updates. We'll go to the next one, zoom up on this. We'll hit play. It goes through and makes the same revisions over and over again. All right, now, if I back up from that, just so you know, the last limitation on these is there is an aperture around your crosshair. It is working the same way as if you were picking on the screen. So I can't necessarily run it from this level because when you're picking, it isn't necessarily going to do what you want. So when I'm out this far, if I say play, it's going to say, wait a minute, it wasn't able to select objects, you know, where I'm at in space. So let me zoom extents. I kind of need to be somewhat close to the size that I was working with before, so that when it's picking objects, it's not a bunch of things wadded on top of each other, or I'm not too close to where I miss them. If I hit play, it goes ahead and puts those things in. All right, last thing, if I click on manage, we can come down, I can see all the macros that have been built. If you look at options, this is the area where they are saved for me. This is an area where I can save them for other folks, maybe make that folder read only, so I can control what they're able to do with it and whatnot. So personal and enterprise, we can do that. The other thing that I can do is from within here, if we'd like to modify or delete one of these or rename, we can select and make those changes from this particular location. All right. So with that, I'm going to hop back to here. We'll come back to my my slides. I am very close to the end on time for questions. So what I'm going to do, I'll follow up with Jeff afterwards and see if there's anything we still need to catch up on. But in the interest of that time, anything that we've not addressed from a question standpoint, we will get back to you. There's my alarm telling me that I'm over. We'll get back to you with an answer. On behalf of Angel and Alan, who were out today, Jeff and myself, we'd like to thank you for attending our session. We know your time is valuable. We appreciate you investing some of that time with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks when we have our next session. Thanks again. Hope you all have a great day. See ya.